There was a bright yellow Future Community Park property of HOA sign staked dead center in my backyard, right where my daughter planted her sunflower patch last spring. Next to it, a guy in a reflective vest, digging a hole like he owned the place. How the hell did we get here? Oh man, buckle up. This story's a wild one. Let me tell you everything. Alright, so let me back up for a second and explain how we even ended up in this neighborhood. Because trust me, I wasn't planning on turning my backyard into a war zone, and definitely not with the HOA. All I ever wanted was some quiet, a patch of green, and a little breathing room from the world. My wife Sarah and I moved into this place a few years back. We were hunting for a slower pace of life after years of city noise and parking tickets. She's an English professor, smart as hell, sharp tongue, heart of gold, and I'm, well, a lawyer, but not the billboard kind you see with their arms crossed on bus benches. I deal in property law, land use, zoning regulations, the dry stuff, the stuff that puts people to sleep. But I've always loved it. There's something about understanding how land works in this country, how it's tied to history, power, money, family. It's not just dirt, it's identity, it's roots. Back then, we were expecting our daughter, Em, and I don't know, maybe it was a cliche, new baby, new house, but when we first saw this place, I felt something. It wasn't flashy. Little two-story craftsman, wraparound porch, couple of old oaks out front. But what got me wasn't the house at all, it was the land behind it. That backyard stretched further than anything we'd seen in our price range. Way in the back, past the trimmed lawn, it dipped slightly into what looked like an overgrown, forgotten pocket of land. Wild grass, a few stubborn saplings, even a patch of blackberry bushes. Nature just doing its thing. It felt untouched. It felt ours. I still remember how Sarah looked at me squinting toward the far end. That part's included? It was. Full parcel, on the plat and deed. The seller told us most people overlooked that lot because the old HOA had tried to zone it for green space decades ago, but the proposal was shut down and abandoned. The land had sat untouched ever since, and was ultimately absorbed into private lots during subdivision. Legally, it was mine, and more importantly, it felt like mine. That was the kicker. I'd read every word of the title report myself, double-checked county land use records, walked the lines with a surveyor. There wasn't a single gray area in that transaction. That land was solidly, unquestionably ours, and for a long time it stayed that way. Peaceful. We turned part of it into a little walking path. Sarah added a hammock between two ash trees. I built a fire pit, and later a simple wooden gazebo, nothing fancy, just enough for some string lights and a few lawn chairs. Em learned to ride her bike back there, dug for worms, planted sunflowers, named a rabbit that kept visiting, then cried for 3 days when it stopped showing up. That place wasn't just a backyard, it was our little bubble, a quiet place where time slowed down. It was where we celebrated birthdays, grilled steaks on Memorial Day, sat and listened to the cicadas after long days. It's where Em brought her first science project, a mason jar full of dirt and acorns, and declared it her forest lab. And I'll tell you something else. I kept my profession quiet, not because I was hiding anything, but because I liked the idea of being just Mike from the corner house. Not Attorney Haynes, not the guy people call when their neighbor builds a fence 3 inches over the line, just the dad with the hammock and the unkempt garden bed. We paid our dues to the HOA on time, waved at neighbors, kept our bushes trimmed and our trash cans hidden, never went to meetings, never caused trouble. I figured if I respected the space, it'd respect me back. Man, I was so blissfully wrong. But back then it was good. I had no reason to think the quiet life was ever gonna change. Not until a knock on the door shifted everything. But I'll get to that. Right now, all you need to know is this. That land behind my house, that patch of trees and weeds and wild sunflowers, it was ours. It was sacred, and someone decided they wanted to take it. It started with lemonade. I was out front on the porch one afternoon, sanding down the armrest on one of those old Adirondack chairs I keep swearing I'll repaint every summer. Em was at the end of the driveway with her little folding table and a cardboard sign that read lemonade 50 size or free if you're nice. It was cute, you know? One of those suburban parenting moments you file away for when she's a moody teenager slamming doors. That's when I saw her. Blonde bob, high heels sinking into the sidewalk cracks, and that tight HOA clipboard clutch that screamed, "I have something to say and you're going to hear it." I'd seen her before at a couple neighborhood BBQs, but never actually spoken with her. Always the one standing a little too straight, talking a little too loud. Her name was Karen. Of course it was. She marched straight up to Em's table first. Not a hi, not a smile, just bent down, frowned, and said, "Technically, sidewalk sales aren't allowed under Section 4, subsection B, but I'll let it slide this once. Looks cute." Then she stood up and looked straight at me like I was supposed to thank her. I set the sandpaper down and gave her a nod. Not friendly, not hostile, just enough to say, I see you and I'm choosing peace today. She didn't take the hint. Michael, right? She asked, already stepping onto the porch without waiting for an answer. I'm Karen. I'm the new HOA president. We met at the Johnson's Chili Cook-Off last year. I don't even remember going to that, but sure, I nodded again. Nice to meet you, Karen. She gave me this smile, tight, polished, almost practiced. I was just doing my afternoon rounds and thought I'd drop by and say hello. Welcome you more formally to the community now that I'm in charge. I raised an eyebrow. We've been here 5 years. Oh, I know, she said, laughing like I'd made a joke. But now things are getting organized. We're revitalizing the committee structure, implementing new beautification goals. Lots of exciting things coming down the pipeline. Sarah once described people like Karen as voluntold tyrants. She wasn't wrong. Karen's gaze drifted past me toward the backyard like she was doing a mental inventory. She even tilted her head a little like she'd caught a whiff of something odd. You've got quite a bit of land back there, she said. Casual, like it just popped into her mind. I didn't take the bait. Yeah, came with the house. Oh, I know. I've reviewed the parcel maps. I'm actually working on a community development plan, and that little pocket of yours borders the proposed greenbelt path we've been designing. It would make a perfect connector. We were thinking maybe a butterfly garden? Something natural and inviting. I gave her the same polite smile I use in court when someone thinks they've just nailed a closing argument, but forgot about that one key clause that guts their whole case. That sounds lovely, I said, leaning back against the post, but that's private property. She kept smiling, but her eyes got sharper. Of course, nothing's been decided. We're still in the idea phase, just something to think about. She pulled a glossy pamphlet out of her bag and handed it to me. It had mock-ups, photoshopped kids playing near fountains, trees planted in neat rows, benches that no one in their right mind would actually sit on in the summer. Right in the center was a map, and right there, marked in soft green pastel, was a slice of my backyard labeled Future Community Access Zone. I remember my fingers tightening just slightly around the paper. Looks like you've already done some deciding, I said, still calm. I wasn't mad yet, just aware. She chuckled. Oh, it's just a mock-up. Conceptual. We're floating ideas to see what resonates. You know, trying to build something everyone can enjoy. Everyone and apparently except the guy who actually owned the land. I told her I'd take a look and let her know if I had thoughts. She thanked me and turned to go, stopping just long enough to lean toward M's lemonade stand again. You know, if you add a sign-up sheet for HOA emails, it could count as community engagement. Just a thought. Then she clicked away in those heels like she'd just done me the biggest favor in the world. I stood there for a good minute after she left, staring at that pamphlet. I wasn't angry, not yet, but something was off. I've dealt with enough clients and contracts to know when someone's laying down groundwork. This wasn't just a friendly idea exchange. This was a toe in the water, a test to see how much resistance they'd meet. The thing is, when someone hands you a pamphlet with a map of your backyard already printed and labeled, it means they've been planning that for a while, and they didn't think you'd be a problem. That's what got me, not the butterfly garden, not the idea of a walking path or benches. It was the assumption that I'd roll over, that I'd go along quietly, that I didn't know exactly what they were doing. I folded the pamphlet, slipped it into my back pocket, and went back to sanding my chair. But from that moment on, I wasn't just Mike with the hammock anymore, I was watching. A couple weeks passed. Nothing major happened, just a few passive-aggressive flyers in the mailbox about community participation and enhancing public access to shared spaces. Standard HOA fluff. I figured maybe that weird little visit from Karen was a one-off. Maybe she realized that map was a bad idea and moved on to her next pet project, like repainting mailboxes or counting how many inches people left their garbage bins from the curb. Then one morning, I looked out the kitchen window and saw two guys in orange vests walking the back edge of my yard with a measuring wheel. At first I thought it was a utility crew, but they weren't near any lines and they weren't looking down. They were looking around. One of them had a clipboard. The other had those little pink flags they use for lot lines. I walked out with my coffee, nice and easy, leaned on the porch rail, and just watched. They didn't see me until they'd already dropped 3 flags in the grass. I didn't say a word, just stood there until the one with the clipboard finally noticed me and gave this awkward little wave. You guys working for the HOA? I asked. Yeah, he said. Just doing a preliminary site assessment. For what? He hesitated. Future development. I sipped my coffee. On whose land? That threw him. He looked at the clipboard like it might bail him out, but of course it didn't. They mumbled something about directive from the board and packed up real fast. I didn't stop them. No point, they'd already shown their hand. Karen hadn't backed off. She'd just switched gears and hoped I wasn't paying attention. From that moment, things got steadily weirder. A couple days later, a notice appeared on my front door. Not in the mailbox, taped to the door. It was from the HOA on that fake formal letterhead they love. Bold serif font, the eagle logo that looks like it was designed by someone's nephew, and it read like some kind of proclamation from a homeowner's Vatican. It claimed that Section 9.1 of the HOA covenant granted the board temporary access to adjacent parcels for surveying and pre-development research, including but not limited to topographic analysis and environmental studies. Then, in bold, homeowners are encouraged not to interfere with these operations to ensure community harmony. I stood there on the porch holding that paper like it might light itself on fire in my hand. Community harmony, huh? Sarah found me reading it. She leaned in, skimmed it, and said, "That's the nicest way I've ever seen someone say, 'Stay out of the way while we steal your yard.'" I smiled, but it wasn't funny. That week I started finding more flags. Different colors now, yellow, blue, even one red one planted right next to M's wildflower patch. One morning I came out and found a tiny orange stake with reflective tape right in front of our fire pit. Like they were playing some slow, weird game of territorial chess. I called the HOA office just to test the waters and asked if someone could explain the markings. The girl who answered sounded fresh out of college and utterly overwhelmed. She said she'd check with Karen and get back to me, which of course never happened. Then came the sign. Not big, not flashy, just a plastic yard sign hammered into the grass near the back of the property, right where that invisible line between ours and not yours was being so enthusiastically redrawn. It read, "Future Community Park Site, Phase 1, Planning Underway." That was when I realized they weren't testing boundaries anymore. They were announcing intentions. Now, I should have been furious, and I was, but not the kind of hot-headed, door-kicking, angry people imagine. It was colder, heavier, that slow-burning kind of anger that lawyers are taught to control and aim like a laser. I didn't rip the sign out. I didn't march into their office. I just took a picture, printed it, and taped it to the back of my own shed wall, where I was starting to line up the evidence. Sarah called it the war room, half joking. M asked if the sign meant we were getting a playground. I told her no, it meant someone forgot how to read a deed. She didn't get it, but she nodded solemnly like I'd explained something very important. Then the real petty stuff started. We got a violation notice for excessive outdoor structures. It had a picture of our gazebo that's been there for 3 years. Suddenly it was an unauthorized build. Then came the complaint about unregulated vegetation. I walked out to find someone had literally spray painted an X on a patch of blackberry bushes near the back fence, like we were in a condemned zone. Sarah got an email from the HOA about possible noise disturbances during non-quiet hours. That one made her laugh out loud. The night they were talking about, we'd been watching a movie on the couch with the volume at barely toddler-friendly. Then M stepped on a rusty nail that had been left in the grass. Not a huge injury, but enough for a tetanus shot and a week of limping. I searched the yard and found 2 more nails, some wire, and a half-buried section of metal pipe near the new flag markers. Coincidence? Maybe, but I've seen too much in court to believe in that kind of coincidence. I started noticing cars slowing down in front of the house more often. A few neighbors stopped waving. One even crossed the street when I was out walking the dog. The mood shifted, quietly but unmistakably. Karen wasn't just working angles through paperwork. She was shaping perception. At the next HOA meeting, first one I'd attended since we moved in, Karen introduced a presentation called Reclaiming Underutilized Green Space. She didn't say my name, didn't even mention an address, but the photos in her slides, all taken behind my house. She used phrases like invisible boundaries and greater good and legacy design for future generations. People clapped, nodded. One woman asked if we'd be getting a splash pad. Another asked if they could plant a community herb garden near the wildflowers. I didn't say a word. Karen smiled through the whole thing like a stage actress playing a benevolent queen. She thanked everyone for their support, mentioned how some resistance was expected, and reminded us how important it was to remain united. That night, I found a chalk outline drawn behind my shed, just a rough border, maybe 20 feet long, that curved unnaturally into my property line. They were drawing their map right on the land. I stood there, watching the moonlight catch on that faint white line, and something settled in me. Heavy and quiet. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a takeover. The morning I walked into the county assessor's office, I still had dirt under my fingernails from pulling up another round of survey flags. I'd kept them, by the way, every single one, tossed them in an old 5-gallon bucket that used to hold sidewalk chalk and bubbles for M. By the time I brought it into the garage, it looked like a porcupine had crawled in and died. I wasn't coming in angry. Not yet. This was still me trying to handle things like a grown-up. Calm, professional. Reasonable. You know, that thing HOA boards always say they want from homeowners, right before they slap you with a violation for having the wrong color wind chimes. The woman behind the desk was nice, middle-aged, glasses on a beaded chain, the kind of person who probably made extra banana bread just to give it away. She pulled the records for my parcel without any drama, printed off the maps, and even helped me go through the most recent updates. Nothing had changed, not since the day I bought the house. My property line was the same. No rezoning, no adjustments, no city initiatives tied to that strip of land. Clean. She even leaned in a little and said, "You're not the first one asking about the HOA lately. Something going on?" I gave her a non-answer smile, just making sure everything's in order. I left with a folder of maps, stamped documents, and 2 contact cards for people in planning and zoning, just in case. Back home, I scanned everything into my server, labeled every file, printed a fresh copy for the war room. Then I did what you're supposed to do in these kinds of situations. I contacted the HOA officially. Not a phone call, not a chat in the cul-de-sac, a formal letter. Certified mail, stamped, signed, delivered. It laid everything out. The boundary lines, the ownership records, the photographic evidence, the ongoing intrusion. I cited relevant parts of the HOA bylaws and reminded them of their legal limitations on entering private property without written consent. I asked, politely but firmly, for all activities related to the future park to cease until a proper review could be done with full homeowner involvement. I didn't even mention I was a lawyer. That was deliberate. I didn't want to come off as threatening. Not yet. This wasn't a courtroom. This was my neighborhood. I was still trying to live in it. A week went by. Nothing. Then a reply arrived. Another letter. Not from Karen directly, of course. It came from the HOA's legal representative, Todd, a guy named Derek Mason, who ran a tiny firm 3 towns over and mostly handled petty landlord disputes and dog bite settlements. The letter was 2 pages of corporate speak, layered with that smug tone people use when they think they're winning. It acknowledged receipt of my letter, thanked me for my engagement, and then doubled down on their interpretation of shared development zones under HOA guidelines. Not laws, guidelines. They claimed their actions were fully in accordance with their mission to improve communal living experiences. No mention of my deed, no response to the land records, not one sentence addressing the fact that they were trespassing, so I escalated, just a little. I filed a complaint with the City Code Enforcement Office, sent them everything. The maps, the photos, the sign, even M's drawings of the big mean man with the metal stick who came near the flowers. The guy who eventually called me back was polite but non-committal. Said land disputes involving HOAs were tricky, said it might be more of a civil matter unless I had proof of damage or a clear zoning violation. I asked what qualified as proof. He said, broken structures, erosion, contaminants, that kind of thing. Then he added, almost like an afterthought, if they start any real construction without a permit, though, that's our jurisdiction. So I waited, watched, documented. Meanwhile, I tried reaching out to the other board members, figured maybe not all of them were on Karen's little crusade. I cornered one at the community pool, some guy named Brent who looked permanently sunburned and always wore sandals. He blinked a lot and said things like, "Oh wow, I wasn't aware of all that, and I'll definitely bring this up." He never did. I even went to my next-door neighbor, Tom. Retired Navy, lived here longer than anyone else on the street. Quiet guy, but solid. He'd been friendly in that way. Old school guys are. Short nods, small talk, good fences, make good neighbors kind of vibe. When I brought it up, he just sighed and said, "Karen's been sniffing around everybody's yard lately. You're not the only one she's targeting." That caught me off guard. Who else? He wouldn't say, just shook his head. People don't want trouble. You start pushing back. She makes you look like the crazy one. Easier to let her have what she wants. That sat heavy with me. I talked to Sarah that night while we were washing dishes. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "She's got the microphone," she said, "and she's good at sounding like she's helping. People want easy. They want someone to handle the hard stuff. Karen makes them feel like they're in good hands." "She's stealing land," I said. "She's organizing a park," Sarah replied, sarcastic. "Big difference." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. I wasn't sleeping well anymore, kept waking up in the middle of the night, going to the window, checking the yard. More flags kept showing up, more notices, more whispers in the neighborhood. At one point, a city tree crew showed up with orders to trim branches, obstructing future pedestrian routes. I asked to see the work order. It had my address on it. The guys weren't happy when I told them to leave, but they did. Barely. The next HOA meeting I spoke. I didn't go in guns blazing. I stood up during open comment and calmly explained the property rights involved, the legal overreach, the trespassing. I cited case law. I passed out copies of my parcel map. Karen let me talk. She even nodded like she was taking me seriously. Then she said, "Thank you, Michael, for your very informative presentation. I think we all appreciate your passion." And that was it. No questions. No discussion. She moved on to the next agenda item, repainting the benches near the clubhouse. After the meeting, someone had keyed the word "mine" into the side of my mailbox. I tried to laugh it off. Told Sarah maybe we should start calling the gazebo the disputed zone. But it wasn't funny anymore, not even a little, because I'd followed every rule, checked every box, made every call, wrote every letter, raised every concern the right way, and nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't even looking to win. I just wanted my yard back. But whatever Karen was building, she wasn't planning on giving an inch. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I was just pissed. You know that feeling when everything's quiet, but your brain won't shut up? That's where I was. Couldn't sleep. Again, so I went out to the garage to pace, maybe clean something, maybe hammer a nail into a board, just to feel like I was fixing something I could control. I ended up digging through some old storage bins looking for distraction. Tax docs, blueprints from when we were thinking about remodeling the bathroom, my dad's old tools I still hadn't organized. And then I found that box. It was one of those heavy-duty banker boxes, the kind with the handholds and the lid that never stays on right. It was labeled House Docs, Purchase. I hadn't opened it since the week we moved in. I didn't need to. I'd already scanned everything, and the originals just sat there gathering dust. Until now. I pulled it onto the workbench, popped the lid, and started flipping through papers. Deed. Closing disclosures. Appraisal reports. The plat map. All familiar. I'd seen these 100 times. But underneath the closing docs was a manila folder I didn't remember. No label, just a single staple at the top and the sharp corner of something laminated sticking out the side. Inside was a certified copy of an easement agreement from 2004, signed and stamped. It wasn't part of our closing packet, not officially. It was supplemental. Probably handed off during some side meeting between attorneys when the title company wanted to be extra thorough. But the second I saw the first line, I knew I'd struck gold. It was an agreement between the HOA, this very HOA, and the original developer. The language was stiff, old school, boilerplate, but the meaning was clear. The HOA had attempted to claim an easement through what's now my backyard almost 20 years ago, and been denied. Flat out, on record, denied. The developer at the time pushed back hard, citing land use conflict, lack of utility purpose, and most importantly, existing private ownership transfer plans. The HOA had tried to sneak in a community corridor to connect two green zones behind the row of houses, but the developer blocked it. They lost. Here's the kicker. The document was signed by the HOA board president at the time, Karen L. Stewart. Yeah, same Karen. Back then, she wasn't in charge of anything, just another board member with big ideas and a Sharpie-colored map, but her name was right there in ink, signature, and date. I stared at it for a long time, not even sure what I was feeling. There was more. Attached to the back of the folder was a legal memo written by a firm I recognized, big guys downtown, the kind who charge by the quarter hour and carry suit jackets over their shoulders like TV lawyers. The memo confirmed the denial of access, outlined the failed attempts to appeal the decision, and warned the HOA board not to pursue the matter again unless a full replatting and majority homeowner approval could be secured in accordance with Articles 7 and 9 of the HOA Charter. That approval never happened. I would have known. Hell, anyone would have known. I set the papers down on the workbench and just stared at them. My hands were shaking a little, not from anger, from clarity. Karen knew. She knew the HOA lost the fight for that land decades ago. She'd been part of it. She'd signed the paperwork, and now, years later, she was trying to take it anyway, quietly, gradually, banking on the idea that no one would remember, no one would check, and no one would stop her. But I remembered, I checked, and I was absolutely going to stop her. It wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was fraud. It was deception. She'd weaponized community language and fake unity to hide what was basically a personal revenge mission. I took out my phone, snapped pictures of everything, and then scanned the entire folder into my archive. Redundant storage, off-site backups. Years of working in law made me paranoid about losing receipts. I walked back into the house, quietly as I could, and found Sarah sitting on the couch, grading papers. She looked up, saw the folder in my hand, and raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I held it up like a trophy. "It's the nail in her coffin." She smiled. Just a little. Just enough. And that was the night I stopped reacting and started planning. Because now I had teeth. The next morning, I got up before sunrise. Not because I had to, because I couldn't sleep. I laid there next to Sarah, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that folder in the garage. Her breathing was slow, even, peaceful, and I thought about how long it had been since I'd felt that kind of peace myself. I got dressed, went out back with a mug of black coffee, and just stood there in the grass. I looked at the gazebo, the hammock, the sunflower patch, the ground where Em scraped her knee last summer chasing the dog. All of it felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I finally understood what was really happening. Karen hadn't just picked the wrong guy, she picked the wrong damn battlefield. She thought I was just another suburban pushover, a guy who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and grumbled about HOA fees but wouldn't dare push back when someone with a laminated name tag said otherwise. She thought I was tired, distracted, maybe even soft. And honestly, I had been, for a while, but now I was wide awake, and I had work to do. First thing I did was call in a favor from a colleague of mine, Marcy. She's one of those lawyers who eats insurance companies for breakfast and doesn't blink twice at a 600-page discovery packet. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but when I explained what was going on, she got quiet for a second and then said, "Okay, I'm in. Let's break their teeth." Her words, not mine. I sent her the scans. Everything. The easement denial, the memo, the stamped signatures. Her reply came back 20 minutes later. Just one line. "She's screwed. Let's make it elegant." I smiled at that. Elegant, yes. No firebombs, no screaming matches. Just precision. Over the next few days, I started laying the bricks of the plan. First, I went back through the HOA bylaws, line by damn line, every subsection, every clause. I flagged every rule Karen had broken since she started this land grab. There were plenty. She'd violated disclosure procedures, bypassed membership votes, even skipped public notice requirements for proposed land use changes. Then I dug into the financials. Not because I thought she was stealing, though part of me wouldn't have been surprised, but because I needed a pattern. And sure enough, it was there. Misappropriated budget line items for community beautification. Thousands of dollars marked for surveying, signage, and consultation. Duat, all vaguely described, none with proper approval or breakdowns. Then I called Janet. She was the former board member I barely knew, the one Sarah remembered as the one with the bright scarves and louder opinions. She'd stepped down the year before, citing burnout, but we all knew she and Karen butted heads on everything. I asked if she'd be willing to talk. She said she'd been waiting for someone to ask. We met up at a coffee shop a few blocks away, sat in a corner booth, and talked for 2 straight hours. She brought a spiral notebook filled with notes, dates, votes, procedural violations Karen had either skipped or fudged. She even had a screenshot of an email Karen sent privately to another board member, instructing them to just push it through, we'll deal with blowback later. She slid the notebook across the table and said, I was going to throw it out, but I had a feeling one day it might matter. I walked out of there with a second folder and the beginnings of a timeline. The last piece of the puzzle was gathering voices. I wasn't going to win this alone, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want this to be about me. That's what Karen had counted on. Making it personal, keeping it small. Silencing dissent, one person at a time. So I started talking to neighbors. Not all at once, just a few at a time. A walk with Tom, a beer on the porch with a guy down the block who hadn't been to an HOA meeting in 2 years. A chat with the couple who always put up those over-the-top Halloween decorations. And you know what? Turns out I wasn't alone. Not even close. Karen had ticked off a lot of people. Not just about the land, about everything. Petty rules, selective enforcement. That smug way she acted like queen of the subdivision. But no one wanted to be the one to stand up. Not until someone else did first. So I stood up. I invited a few of them over one evening. Just a casual gathering, chips and beer and folding chairs in the backyard. I laid out the documents, explained what I'd found. I didn't tell them what to do. I just showed them the truth. One of them, a woman named Beth, looked at me and said, "If you go to court, I'll testify." That was the spark. The others nodded. Someone said, "She's gone too far." Another said, "We should have done something sooner." And just like that, we had momentum. I spent the next week quietly building the skeleton of a legal case, drafting the letter of intent, prepping exhibits, collecting statements, photographing every flag, every sign, every corner of that yard. I filed the paperwork for an injunction, I prepped the complaint, I lined up the county assessor's affidavit confirming the unaltered boundaries. Every piece slid into place like I was tightening bolts on an engine, and through all of it, I never said a word to Karen. Let her keep planning her little park. Let her think she'd won. Let her believe the silence meant surrender, because when the hammer dropped, it wasn't going to come from my front porch. It was going to come from the court, and it was going to be elegant. I filed the injunction quietly early in the morning, just after Sarah left for work and Em was still eating cereal in her pajamas. I didn't announce it, didn't post about it, didn't call attention to myself. I just walked it into the clerk's office like it was any other day, handed it over, and walked back out into the warm air with a copy of the stamped filing in my hand. The next move was surgical. We sent the HOA an official cease and desist. Marcy drafted it. She has a way with language that makes you feel like you're being hugged and sued at the same time. It was airtight. Cited the easement denial, the bylaws violations, the lack of proper votes and notices, the unauthorized use of funds. We included photos, timestamps, affidavits, copies of the original deed, and a side-by-side comparison of the current parcel map with the one they'd photoshopped in their little park plan. It was long, it was boring, it was lethal. We sent it certified, signature required. And then we waited. That first day, nothing. Second day, quiet again. The third day, a guy in a navy polo showed up in the backyard. Not a neighbor, not a contractor, a lawyer. HOA counsel, he paced along the imaginary line between community space and my garden beds, talking into a Bluetooth earpiece like he was trying to buy time on a bomb countdown. I didn't go out there, just watched from the window, coffee in hand. Eventually he left, didn't even knock. That told me everything I needed to know. They were scrambling. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Usually these things were half a dozen bored retirees and Karen pretending to take notes. This one, everyone showed up. People who hadn't said a word in 5 years came out of the woodwork, folding chairs lining the back, neighbors leaning on the walls, some even standing in the hallway outside. Karen tried to act like it was business as usual. She started with the same cheerful tone, same bullet points on her handouts, same plastic smile, but when she got to community park update, I raised my hand. She hesitated. Just for a second. Yes, Michael? I stood. I was holding a folder. Not a thick one. Just enough to be noticed. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. I'd like to ask the board to explain the discrepancy between the parcel ownership map submitted in the last newsletter and the certified documents from the county assessor's office confirming my lot's boundaries, which have not changed since 1993. Dead silence. Karen blinked. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I opened the folder and pulled out a copy of the original parcel plat. Held it up. Clear, .dyed, stamped, .dyed, county seal. This is what I'm referring to. A few people in the crowd leaned forward. One guy even pulled out his phone and started recording. I didn't ask him to, but I didn't stop him either. I'd also like to know, I continued, why HOA funds were used to contract surveyors to enter private property without permission, conduct unauthorized mapping, and install signage misrepresenting legal boundaries. Now the murmurs started. Karen cut in, trying to keep control. Michael, we appreciate your concerns. Appreciation isn't necessary. Accountability is. That line landed. I could feel it ripple across the room. People looked at each other. Someone whispered something I couldn't hear, but it ended with the word illegal. I handed a second document to the guy sitting near the front, Brent, the board member who always looked like he was 2 SPF levels short of surviving summer. He read the first paragraph and his face changed. He passed it to the person next to him without saying a word. Then I pulled out the kicker, the easement denial, dated, signed, with Karen's name on it. I'd also like the board to explain why the president failed to disclose this signed easement denial from 2004, in which the HOA's request for a community pathway through my property was formally rejected and warned not to be pursued further without a replat and full membership vote. That hit her like a brick to the chest. She tried to smile through it. That document is very old, and still legally binding, and your signature's right here. I didn't need to say anything else. The room took over. People started talking over one another. Not yelling, just energized. Awake. All the stuff they'd bottled up started spilling out. Someone brought up a time she got fined for planting tomatoes in her front yard while Karen's friend had a literal boat in their driveway. Someone else mentioned a time Karen had a landscaper tear out a flower bed without warning. It was like watching dominoes fall in reverse, one truth triggering another, revealing a bigger picture that had always been there, but no one wanted to admit they'd seen it. Karen tried to regain the floor, tried to move on, but people weren't having it. Brent raised his hand. I motioned to suspend discussion of the community park project until legal review is complete. Someone else seconded it. They voted. It passed. Karen's face didn't move, but I could see it in her eyes. That sharp glint, gone, replaced by something duller, something closer to panic. After the meeting, I didn't stick around. People were still buzzing, clumping into little groups, flipping through copies of the docs I'd passed out. I just walked out into the parking lot, folder under my arm, air warm against my face. Back home, Em was sitting on the couch, drawing in one of her sketchbooks. She looked up and asked, "Did the meeting go okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, kiddo, it did." But that was only the beginning, because Karen wasn't going down easy. Not yet. The fallout started like a slow crack in a windshield. Quiet at first. Then suddenly everything was splintering at once. The injunction landed hard. It was granted without much fuss. Clear evidence, clear property boundaries, clear violation. The judge didn't even blink. HOA was ordered to halt all activity related to the future park, remove signage, and cease entry onto my property under threat of contempt. That alone would have been enough for most people, but not me. Because here's the thing. Karen hadn't just trespassed or fudged a few votes. She'd manipulated a whole damn community. She'd used her position to push a personal vendetta, wrapped it in community language, and steamrolled anyone who got in her way. That doesn't just disappear with a court order. That's not the kind of thing you quietly clean up and move on from. That kind of rot needs to be dragged into the sunlight. So that's exactly what I did. I emailed the scanned documents to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Nothing dramatic, no soapboxing. Just a folder titled, "For Your Records, Legal Status of HOA Park Initiative." Inside were 6 PDFs. The original plat, the easement denial, the memo from the developer, the financial summary of HOA budget irregularities, the legal injunction, and a personal note. This isn't about 1 yard, it's about transparency. If you've ever felt intimidated, excluded, or unheard, now's your chance to speak. I hit send, and then I waited. I thought maybe 5 or 6 people would respond. Maybe 10. Instead, within an hour, my inbox was overflowing. People I barely knew were thanking me, apologizing, telling me their own stories. One guy said Karen had threatened to report his fence for being emotionally disruptive because it was painted black. A woman admitted she paid a fine for having her wreath up too long after a holiday, but later saw Karen's best friend with a full-blown inflatable Santa up in March. And then something unexpected happened. One of the emails was from a guy named Rob Kim. He was an assistant producer at a local news station, small, regional, but still real media. Apparently, his aunt lived 2 blocks over and had forwarded him my email. He asked if I'd be willing to talk. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to be that guy, the one standing on his porch yelling about my rights to a bored camera crew, but Sarah looked at me and said, "Mike, this isn't just about you anymore." So I said yes. The segment aired 3 nights later. Just 5 minutes during the evening news, buried between a story about a dog rescue and a weather update. But it hit. The anchor called it a suburban showdown over land, law, and power. They showed a few slow pans of my backyard, the park sign, and part of the HOA meeting where Karen tried to dodge the easement denial. I didn't say anything wild, just the truth, plain and clear. A system that's supposed to protect neighborhoods had been hijacked by one person with too much ego and not enough accountability. By the end of the week, HOA members were demanding a special meeting, not just the usual monthly potluck quorum kind of thing. A real vote, a no-confidence vote. Karen tried to stop it, claimed it was against procedure, said it undermined board cohesion. But by then the tide had turned. People weren't scared anymore. They were mad. Mad they'd been lied to. Mad they'd been fined, while Karen's own son had spray-painted the sidewalk 2 summers ago and nothing ever came of it. Mad they'd been called selfish for wanting a say in how their money and land were being used. I showed up to the meeting early, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to look Karen in the eye when she walked in. She barely glanced at me. Her smile was thinner now. Edges fraying. Brent opened the floor. The motion was read. There was a pause. Then, from the back of the room, someone stood and said, "I vote yes." Another person stood, yes, and another, and another. One by one, people got to their feet, not yelling, not chanting, just standing. Clear, firm, a tide you couldn't argue with. When it was over, Karen was out, just like that. She left before the meeting ended, didn't say a word, just grabbed her bag and slipped out the side door. The new interim president, a retired accountant named Linda, who everyone liked but no one expected to lead, stepped up and said, "Let's get back to doing things the right way." I stood in the back, arms crossed, not saying much. I didn't need to. That night, Sarah and I sat on the back porch with 2 glasses of wine and a plate of crackers neither of us really touched. We just sat there listening to the wind in the trees and the soft hum of late summer cicadas. Em wandered out with the dog and curled up in the hammock. She looked over and said, "Is the backyard safe again?" I looked at Sarah, then back at Em. "Yeah," I said, "it's safe." Not because of a court order, not because of a sign being taken down, because people finally stood up, because truth finally spoke louder than power, because the quiet ones decided enough was enough. And when that happens, even someone like Karen can't hold on. A couple months later, I was out back with Em, helping her tie a rope swing to one of the old ash trees. Nothing fancy, just a thick nylon rope and a wooden seat we sanded down together. She wanted to paint it with flowers, so we laid out the acrylics and made a mess of it on the patio. The dog kept stepping in the paint and leaving little green paw prints on the concrete. It was chaos, the good kind. The yard looked like itself again. No more flags, no more signs, just grass, trees, and the steady rhythm of life happening where it's supposed to. Sarah had planted herbs along the fence line. The gazebo got a fresh coat of stain. I even built a new bench by the fire pit with leftover wood from the swing. People started stopping by more. A couple neighbors who'd kept their distance during the worst of it showed up with beer and folding chairs. Brent brought his kid over to play catch with Em. Even Tom, who hardly ever came out unless it was trash day, walked over one evening just to sit with me and watch the sunset. He didn't say much, just gave a quiet nod, like we'd both been through something that didn't need words. HOA meetings are different now, less formal, more honest. No one pretends things are perfect, but there's this new feeling in the room, like everyone finally remembered that the whole point of a neighborhood is neighbors, not power trips, not passive-aggressive letters about lawn height. Just people living side by side, trying not to drive each other crazy. Linda's doing a decent job running things. She asks questions, listens to people, sends emails that actually sound like a person wrote them. The board rotates more now, gives everyone a shot. No one's fighting about whose mailbox shade is too bold. Karen, I don't know where she went. Rumor has it she moved to a condo downtown, one of those HOA-free buildings with valet trash service and no yard to micromanage. I try not to think about her too much. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. Some people thrive on control. And when they lose it, they disappear into the next place they think they can bend. Let her. That chapter's closed. As for me, I kept that folder, the one from the garage. It's tucked in my home office now, in a drawer labeled personal as Do Not Trash. Not because I expect to need it again, but because every time I look at it, I'm reminded that even the quiet ones can draw a line. That sometimes standing your ground isn't about being loud. It's about knowing, deep in your bones, that you're right. You know, I never wanted to be the guy who made noise, never wanted to be the lawyer neighbor or the man who turned a backyard dispute into a miniature revolution. I just wanted a quiet life, a patch of green, a hammock under two trees where my kid could swing without getting triped up by bureaucracy. And now I've got it. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the cicadas start buzzing and the string lights flicker on under the gazebo, I sit out there with a glass of something strong, close my eyes, and just breathe, not thinking, not planning, just grateful. Funny thing is, after everything that happened, I think the land feels different too, like it remembers, like it knows it was fought for, and it knows it was kept. End.